The Moscow Enigma, written by Christian Hirsch, narrated by Colette Redgrave. Chapter 1, Part 1. The rain pattered hard against the window, and, as Alexandra looked out, she saw life as a mosaic cloud of colour and motion. The wind-swept barren trees braced themselves against the gusts of chilly wind, and she couldn't help but feel sympathy for the trees. She wondered if they felt cold like human beings, or if they had any feelings. Alexandra had always felt more towards nature and animals than she did for humans. Actually, it was men that she never cared about. She viewed men as too one-dimensional and believed they lacked the sophistication that she needed. Everyone saw Alexandra as an enigma. This was completely fine with her. It afforded her the luxury of living a secretive life which was completely controlled by her. No one could crack Alexandra, and, for those who tried, she only pushed them away and ultimately out of her life. She was a 27-year-old puzzle to everyone who knew her. In some hidden respects, she was an adult child refusing to grow up, and this explained her childish affections and her childlike fantasies and imagination. It was this imagination that would always consume her when she was alone, in trouble, or sad, as she was today. Life today was a blurry watercolour that was being damaged by the falling rain. The rain was cold and the sky was a concrete colour that reminded Alexandra of the grey Play-Doh putty that was one of her favourite possessions as a child orphan. She thought of how simple life was then, all those years ago, and wished it would be that way now. She felt that the loneliness of the landscape and the plight of the rain-soaked trees opened the gates of the past, and all of its sadness overwhelmed her. She reflected on the orphanage where she had lived in for most of her early childhood, and on how little it had offered her in terms of physical possessions. The few volunteers and the Orthodox sisters had been the surrogate mothers and fathers she had never had. Toys and luxuries in those faraway days were a premium, which is why she had loved her putty so much. With her imagination, a can of Play-Doh had been an opportunity to change and devise new shapes and creations into whatever she wanted. Perhaps this innocent can of clay had afforded her control, or perhaps it had been a means of imaginative escape, but, whatever the reason, Play-Doh had been so much more than just grey putty. As the rain pattered against the hotel's window pane, she remembered the painful discovery that there was no permanence to any part of her life when she was 6 years old. Alexandra reflected upon when she once had modelled the clay into a doll, and her pride at having done so. Only after a full week did Sister Ekaterina finally convince her to lend her putty to another girl, which reinforced the fact that life in the orphanage meant that nothing was really hers. Everything she ever loved seemed temporary. She loved Sister Maria, but knew she wasn't really her mother, a fact crystallised when she finally arranged for a real family to take Alexandra away. She loved the putty and the pink stuffed kitten she often smuggled into her bed, but both of these were only hers if she managed to steal them away from the smaller children. In the end, nothing she loved was hers unconditionally. Life lessons like these proved to be a tough training ground, which would affect Alexandra later in life, and they affected her especially now. The rain washed down the window pane, and a tear washed down her right cheek. It was often that Alexandra would lapse into the past and find herself staring intently with a locked gaze, looking, ultimately, at nothing. "Christ," she whispered to herself. She blinked twice quickly and shook her head to escape the unpleasantness of her childhood, yet the depressing scene of what lay behind reinforced her melancholy. What lay in the room behind her was an escape, albeit with its own shallowness. The sound of the toilet flushing broke the silence, and she quickly wiped away the tear and breathed in deeply. She adjusted her bra and zipped her short skirt and wiggled twice, as she always did when adjusting a short skirt. Vladimir appeared from the toilet, an imposing man in stature and the typical Russian client she seemed to always have as her John. He approached her, but one hand on the back of her head and the other against her arse, squeezing it firmly. "Why did you put the skirt on? You know how I love seeing your ass." Alexandra smiled like a coy girl as she tossed her head back and replied with a sultry whisper, "Let's spend another hour here and I'll show you more than my papa."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?